What happens when a homeless veteran asks for a glass of water at an upscale restaurant on a scorching summer day in Los Angeles? The waiter's response shocks everyone. A brutal slap that echoes through the dining room. While customers watch in silence, no one realizes that the man in the corner wearing a black hoodie is Keanu Reeves. His response to this act of cruelty transforms not just one life, but an entire community. James woke up to the intense heat radiating through his makeshift shelter under the bridge. The Los Angeles summer sun was particularly brutal today, beating down on the cardboard and tarp that had been his home for the past 8 months. At 52, James carried himself with a quiet dignity that his circumstances couldn't erase. His military posture remained, a remnant of his 15 years of service in the Marines. Today marked day 245 since he lost his apartment. The VA benefits had been tied up in bureaucracy, and his PTSD made holding down a regular job nearly impossible. Still, every morning, James followed the same routine he'd maintained since his service days. He carefully folded his weathered sleeping bag, smoothed his gray-streaked hair, and straightened his cleanest shirt, a faded blue button-down he'd received from the local shelter. Despite everything, James kept himself presentable. He'd learned in the Corps that appearances mattered, and he wasn't about to let his current situation strip away his self-respect. His hands, though calloused, were always clean. He made sure to wash up every morning at the public restroom in MacArthur Park, where the attendant, Maria, would sometimes slip him travel-sized soap and a fresh paper towel. The heat today was different, though. The weather report he'd glimpsed on the electronic billboard showed 103 degrees, and his usual water sources, the drinking fountain in the park and the corner convenience store, were further away than usual. He'd spent the night in a new spot after construction forced him to move from his regular place. James checked his pockets. 2 quarters, a dime, and a nickel. Not enough for a bottle of water, even at the dollar store. His throat felt like sandpaper, and the sweat was already soaking through his shirt. The expensive restaurants along this stretch of downtown usually ignored him, but today he'd have to try. Just a cup of water, that's all he needed. He wasn't looking for handouts or sympathy, just water to make it through this scorching day. As he walked down the sidewalk, James caught his reflection in a store window. He straightened his shoulders, remembering his commanding officer's words, "A Marine never loses his pride, no matter the circumstance." The memory brought a slight smile to his weathered face. He'd faced worse in Fallujah. This was just another challenge to overcome. The street was filling with lunch crowds, office workers in crisp suits, tourists with shopping bags, young professionals tapping away on their phones. James had become good at making himself invisible to them, but today he'd have to step into their world. He spotted an upscale restaurant with outdoor seating, its misters creating a tempting cloud of cool air. Taking a deep breath, he headed toward the entrance, unaware that the next few minutes would change his life forever. The restaurant, Violet and Vine, was one of those trendy spots where lunch could easily cost more than what most people made in a day. Crystal glasses caught the sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, while waiters in pressed black shirts moved smoothly between white-clothed tables. The aroma of truffle oil and grilled Wagyu beef wafted through the air. Nate, the waiter who'd been working there for 3 years, prided himself on maintaining the restaurant's exclusive atmosphere. He'd just finished taking orders from a table of entertainment executives when he spotted James approaching the host's stand. Nate's jaw tightened. He'd worked too hard to let someone like this disturb his section. The restaurant was packed with its usual lunch crowd. A group of women celebrating a birthday occupied the corner booth, their laughter mixing with the soft jazz playing overhead. 2 business deals were being closed over expensive bottles of wine, and a famous food critic was quietly taking notes about her Dover sole. James stood at the entrance, his shadow a stark contrast against the polished marble floor. The hostess, a young woman named Jessica, had stepped away to seat another party, leaving the podium momentarily unattended. James waited patiently, his hands clasped in front of him, trying to appear as unthreatening as possible. The air conditioning hit his face like a blessing, and the sight of water pitchers on nearby tables made his throat feel even drier. He could feel eyes turning toward him, subtle glances and whispers behind menus. A woman clutched her designer purse closer as he shifted his weight from one foot to another. In the far corner, partially hidden by a decorative plant, sat a man in a black hoodie. He'd been quietly eating his meal, occasionally checking his phone, but now his attention was fixed on the scene unfolding at the entrance. Nobody paid him much attention. In Los Angeles, people often dressed down to avoid recognition. Nate approached the host's stand, his shoes clicking against the floor. "Can I help you?" His tone made it clear that help was the last thing he intended to offer. James cleared his throat, his military training kicking in as he stood straighter. "Good afternoon, sir. I apologize for the interruption, but I was hoping I could trouble you for a glass of water. It's quite hot outside." The restaurant had gone quieter now, conversations dipping to whispers as people watched the interaction. Nate's lip curled slightly. Behind him, Jessica had returned to the host's stand, her expression uncertain as she watched the scene unfold. "We serve paying customers only," Nate said loudly, making sure nearby tables could hear him establishing control of the situation. "The gas station is 2 blocks down." James didn't move. "Please, sir. Just 1 glass of water. I'll be on my way immediately after." The man in the hoodie had set down his fork, his full attention now on the escalating situation. A young couple at a nearby table exchanged uncomfortable glances, the woman whispering something to her partner about just buying him a water. Nate stepped closer to James, entering his personal space. The restaurant's pleasant atmosphere had shifted to something tense and uncomfortable. The birthday party in the corner had stopped their celebration, their half-eaten cake forgotten as they watched. "Let me make this perfectly clear," Nate hissed, though his voice carried in the now quiet restaurant. "We don't serve your kind here. This is a respectable establishment." His hand moved to James's shoulder, preparing to physically escort him out. James remained dignified, his voice steady despite his parched throat. "I understand, sir. I'm not looking to cause any trouble. Just a cup of water, and I'll be on my way." His military bearing showed through as he stood his ground, not aggressive but not backing down. The temperature inside the restaurant seemed to drop several degrees as everyone waited to see what would happen next. The man in the hoodie had pushed his chair back slightly, his hand resting on the table's edge. Jessica, the hostess, had taken a step forward, perhaps to intervene, but stopped short when Nate shot her a warning glance. Nobody could have predicted what happened next, a moment that would soon be captured on dozens of cell phones and shared millions of times across social media. A moment that would change not just James's life, but would spark a conversation about humanity, dignity, and the power of kindness in an often cruel world. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Nate's face twisted with rage, his composure shattering completely. "I said get out." His hand swung through the air, connecting with James's face with a sharp crack that echoed through the restaurant. James stumbled backward, more from surprise than the force of the blow. The sound of the slap hung in the air like a thunderclap. Gasps erupted from every corner of the restaurant. Someone's wine glass tipped over, spreading red across white linen like blood. James raised his hand to his cheek, his eyes wide with shock but still maintaining his dignity. He hadn't moved to defend himself or retaliate. Nate stood there, his chest heaving, seemingly surprised by his own actions. But instead of backing down, he doubled down on his cruelty. "That's what happens to garbage that doesn't know its place," he spat out, his voice trembling with adrenaline. Phones had appeared everywhere, recording the scene. A woman at the bar whispered, "Oh my God," into her perfectly manicured hands. The birthday party sat frozen, their celebration forgotten. The food critic had set down her pen, her face pale with shock. James straightened himself, his military training evident in his response to the assault. His voice remained steady, though pain flickered in his eyes. "I served this country for 15 years, son. All I asked for was water." The simple dignity in his words made Nate's action seem even more horrific. But Nate wasn't finished. He grabbed a glass of water from a nearby table and held it up mockingly. "You want water? Here's your water." He moved to throw it, but before he could, a calm voice cut through the tension like a knife. "That's enough." The words weren't shouted, but they carried an authority that made everyone turn. The man in the black hoodie had stood up. He pushed back his hood, revealing a familiar face that caused several people to gasp in recognition. Nate's hand froze mid-air, the water glass trembling slightly. "Mind your own business," he snapped, before recognition slowly dawned on his face. The color drained from his cheeks as he realized who he was talking to. A woman at the bar had already started recording. Her whispered words were picked up clearly in the silence. "That's Keanu Reeves." "Oh my God, that's actually Keanu Reeves." Nate's hand lowered slowly, the water glass clinking as he set it down too hard on the table. The restaurant had gone completely still, the only sound the soft jazz music that now seemed jarringly inappropriate. James stood quietly, his cheek reddening where Nate had struck him, seemingly unaware of the celebrity's intervention. His eyes remained fixed on the floor, the humiliation of the moment weighing heavily on his shoulders. Jessica, the hostess, had tears in her eyes. She'd taken a step toward James with a napkin, but stopped short, unsure what to do. The restaurant's manager had finally emerged from his office, drawn by the commotion, but even he stood frozen, assessing the situation. The famous food critic had picked up her phone, her fingers flying across the screen as she live-tweeted the incident. Around the restaurant, other diners were doing the same, their phones capturing every moment of what was quickly becoming a viral sensation. Nate attempted to regain control of the situation, his voice now taking on a placating tone. "Sir, I was just following our policy about non-paying customers. Your policy is to assault veterans asking for water?" Keanu's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath the words. He'd moved closer now, standing beside James. "Is that what this restaurant stands for?" The manager had finally found his voice, rushing forward with a forced smile. "Mr. Reeves, I assure you this is not how we normally dash. I've been sitting here for 40 minutes, Keanu cut him off. "I've watched your staff ignore this man while serving sparkling water to every table. Not one person offered him basic human dignity. And then this dash," he gestured to Nate, who seemed to be shrinking with each word. The incident had already begun spreading beyond the restaurant's walls. Through the windows, people had started gathering, phones out, recording the scene. The hashtag Keanu Kindness was already trending locally. James finally spoke again, his voice soft but clear. "I apologize for causing trouble. I'll leave now." He turned toward the door, his shoulders straight despite everything, but Keanu gently caught his arm. "You're not going anywhere," Keanu said, before turning back to face Nate and the manager. "But I think someone else is." The confrontation had reached its tipping point. The video was spreading across social media platforms like wildfire. The restaurant's reputation hung by a thread. And Nate stood in the middle of it all, watching his actions spiral far beyond what he could have imagined when he decided to humiliate a homeless veteran asking for water on a hot summer day. Keanu's presence had transformed the atmosphere in the restaurant. He turned to address the manager directly, his voice carrying across the now silent dining room. "This man served our country for 15 years. He asked for water on a 100-degree day. And your employee's response was violence." The manager, sweating in his expensive suit, fumbled with his words. "Mr. Reeves, please allow me to comp your meal and dash." "I don't want a free meal," Keanu interrupted. "I want to know what you're going to do about this." He gestured toward Nate, who had backed up against the host's stand. His earlier bravado completely evaporated. James tried to defuse the situation. "Sir, really, it's not necessary. "It is necessary," Keanu said firmly. He pulled out his phone, showing the manager something on the screen. "Your restaurant's social media is already flooded with videos of what just happened. The local news has picked it up. How do you want this story to end?" The food critic stood up, gathering her things. "I think my review just wrote itself," she announced loudly. Other diners had started asking for their checks, the birthday party hurriedly boxing up their cake. The manager made a decision. "Nate, turn in your apron and leave. You're fired, effective immediately." His voice shook slightly as he turned to James. "Sir, on behalf of Violet and Vine, I offer my deepest apologies." But Keanu wasn't finished. An apology isn't enough. He addressed the room at large. Everyone here watched this happen. Everyone saw a veteran being humiliated for asking for water. What does that say about us? Phones continued recording as Keanu walked to his table and picked up his wallet. He pulled out several $100 bills and placed them on the counter. "This should cover water for anyone who needs it for the next few months." The gesture sparked something in the room. A woman from the birthday party approached, adding money to the pile. Then another diner did the same. Within minutes, a substantial sum had accumulated. "I want this place to start a new policy," Keanu announced. "Anyone who comes in asking for water gets it. No questions asked. And I'll be checking to make sure it happens." The manager nodded quickly, realizing the opportunity to salvage something from this PR disaster. "Yes, absolutely. We'll call it the Dignity Program." James stood quietly through all of this, overwhelmed by the turn of events. Keanu turned to him. "Let's get you something to eat. And then we need to talk about getting you proper help with those VA benefits." A young woman who'd been quietly filming everything spoke up. "My sister works at the VA office. I'm sending her the video right now. This is going to get fast-tracked, I promise you." Nate had removed his apron, his hands shaking. As he headed for the door, he stopped in front of James. "I'm sorry," he whispered, but the words sounded hollow in the face of his earlier actions. The incident had already exploded online. Hashtag veteran dignity and hashtag Keanu kindness were trending nationally. Local news vans had begun arriving outside, their cameras pointed at the restaurant's entrance. Keanu guided James to his table, ordering food and ensuring he got the water he'd originally asked for. As James took his first sip, his hands trembling slightly, Keanu spoke quietly to him. "You're not alone anymore. We're going to fix this." The restaurant had become a hub of activity. People were calling veteran support organizations, sharing contact information, and organizing immediate assistance. The manager had begun drafting a formal policy change, under the watchful eyes of dozens of phone cameras. What had started as a moment of cruelty had transformed into something else entirely, a catalyst for change, sparked by one person's willingness to stand up and say enough. The next few hours passed in a whirlwind. Local news crews had set up outside Violet and Vine, their cameras capturing the steady stream of people coming in to contribute to what was now being called the Veterans Water Fund. The restaurant's phone rang constantly with calls from media outlets seeking comments. Nate sat on a curb 2 blocks away, his head in his hands, watching his phone explode with notifications. His face was plastered across social media, with hashtags like hashtag restaurantbully and hashtag waterslapper following him into digital infamy. His mother had already called, crying, asking how he could do such a thing. Inside the restaurant, James finished a proper meal for the first time in weeks. Keanu had ordered him a steak, insisting that he eat while they talked about next steps. The manager hovered nearby, bringing fresh water every few minutes, his anxiety evident in his over-attentiveness. 4 million views and climbing, announced the food critic, who had stayed to document the aftermath. Her live updates had gone viral, drawing attention from major news networks. The governor just tweeted about implementing emergency water stations across the city during heat waves. James seemed overwhelmed by it all. "I just wanted some water," he said quietly to Keanu. "I never meant to cause all this." "You didn't cause this," Keanu replied. "You just exposed something that needed to be fixed." He was already on the phone with his foundation, arranging immediate assistance for James and coordinating with local veteran support groups. The restaurant's owner had arrived, having cut short a vacation in Palm Springs. He immediately announced that Nate's firing was permanent and that the restaurant would implement a new program providing free meals to veterans in need. Emergency water stations would be set up outside all their locations. Social media continued to explode. Videos of the incident were being shared by celebrities and politicians. Comments poured in from around the world. "This is how we treat our veterans? Shameful. Keanu Reeves showing us again why he's the best of humanity. That waiter better start looking for a new career." Local veterans organizations had mobilized quickly. Within hours, they had representatives at the restaurant, taking down James's information and fast-tracking his benefits application. A nearby hotel offered him immediate accommodation. The woman from the birthday party, who turned out to be a real estate agent, was already making calls about permanent housing options. "My firm has veteran housing programs. We should have you in a proper place within the week." The restaurant's Yelp page crashed from the volume of new reviews. Their rating had plummeted, only slightly buffered by people acknowledging their immediate response to the crisis. The manager had posted a public apology, announcing mandatory sensitivity training for all staff. Nate tried calling the restaurant to apologize again, but his number had been blocked. His social media accounts were flooded with angry messages. Future employers would only need to Google his name to find countless videos of his moment of cruelty. James sat quietly through it all, maintaining his dignity even as the world erupted around him. When asked for comments by reporters, he simply said, "Everyone has bad days. What matters is how we help each other through them." The incident had sparked a larger conversation about how society treats its most vulnerable members. Other restaurants in the area began announcing their own water policies, not wanting to risk similar incidents. The city council scheduled an emergency meeting to discuss public water access during heat waves. Keanu, meanwhile, had stepped away from the cameras, focusing instead on ensuring James had everything he needed. He'd seen how viral moments could fade, leaving people still in need once the attention died down. He was determined that wouldn't happen here. 1 week after the incident, the changes were already visible. James had moved into a temporary apartment, provided through a veterans housing program that Keanu's foundation had expedited. His VA benefits had been unblocked, with a dedicated caseworker assigned to handle his paperwork. The viral video had done more than expose one moment of cruelty. It had revealed systemic issues in veteran care. Across Los Angeles, restaurants and businesses had begun installing water stations outside their establishments. The city had fast-tracked installation of public drinking fountains in areas with high homeless populations. Nate's transformation was unexpected. After days of hiding from public shame, he'd walked into a veteran support center, asking to volunteer. At first, they were hesitant. Everyone recognized him from the video. But something in his demeanor had changed. "I need to understand," he'd told them. "I need to do better." They put him to work in the kitchen, serving meals to homeless veterans. Every day, he heard their stories, learned their names, saw their humanity. The experience was changing him. Violet and Vine had undergone its own transformation. The Dignity program had expanded beyond just offering water. They now hosted weekly dinners for veterans in need, with other restaurants in the area following their lead. The manager had hired 2 veterans as hosts, ensuring that no one seeking help would ever be turned away again. James, despite all the attention, maintained his humble nature. He'd started counseling for his PTSD and was working with a job placement program for veterans. But what touched him most was how his moment of humiliation had sparked real change. "Sometimes it takes a dark moment to bring light," he told Keanu over coffee at the Veterans Center. "I never wanted to be viral, but if it helps others get water when they're thirsty, then it was worth it." Keanu's foundation had launched a citywide initiative, installing water stations and working with businesses to create safe spaces where people could rest and hydrate during extreme weather. The program was already being copied in other cities. The food critic who witnessed everything wrote a powerful piece that went beyond just reviewing restaurants. "We don't just rate establishments on their food anymore," she wrote. "We rate them on their humanity." Nate, still working at the Veterans Center, finally got his chance to properly apologize to James. The meeting was quiet, away from cameras and social media. James listened as Nate explained how the viral shame had forced him to confront his own prejudices. "I was worried about the restaurant's image," Nate admitted. "But I never stopped to think about human dignity. I'm learning now, every day, from the veterans I serve." James offered his forgiveness easily. "Sometimes we need to fall to learn how to stand up," he said, sharing the wisdom he'd gained through his own struggles. The incident had created ripples beyond Los Angeles. Other cities were examining their policies on public water access. Veteran support organizations reported increased donations and volunteer applications. People were paying more attention to those asking for help. Keanu's role hadn't ended with the viral moment. He continued checking on James, ensuring the support systems stayed in place. His foundation worked on creating permanent solutions, not just temporary fixes triggered by social media attention. The transformation wasn't just in policies or programs. It was in people's hearts. Customers at Violet and Vine now greeted everyone who walked through the door, regardless of their appearance. The birthday party group had become regular volunteers at the Veterans Center. The real estate agent had created a special program for housing veterans. 1 month later, the corner where James had first asked for water was unrecognizable. A sleek water station stood outside Violet and Vine, with a simple sign reading, "Hydration is human dignity." The restaurant had become a symbol of transformation in the community. James, now working part-time at the Veterans Center, helped coordinate the water station program across the city. His military experience proved valuable in organizing distribution points and ensuring supplies reached areas with the highest need. His new apartment, though modest, gave him the stability he'd lost months ago. Nate had found his calling at the Veterans Center. The man who once denied water to a thirsty veteran now spent his days ensuring others never went without. His viral moment of cruelty had transformed into a lifetime commitment to kindness. Keanu visited whenever he was in town, often sitting quietly with veterans, listening to their stories. He never sought publicity for his continued involvement, but his presence reminded everyone that real change happens through sustained effort, not just viral moments. The restaurant industry in Los Angeles had changed. Water stations became as common as bike racks outside establishments. The Dignity program expanded to hundreds of locations, each proudly displaying signs welcoming anyone in need of water. One hot afternoon, a young woman approached the water station outside Violet and Vine. Her hands shook as she filled her cup. Inside, James happened to be having lunch with Keanu. Through the window, they watched as the restaurant's new host, a veteran himself, walked out with a fresh glass of ice water and a kind smile. "That's why we keep doing this," Keanu said quietly. "Every glass of water is a reminder of our humanity." James nodded, thinking about his journey from that desperate day to now. "Sometimes the worst moments bring out the best in people," he replied. The incident that had gone viral was now a month old, ancient in internet time. But its impact continued to ripple through the community. The water stations remained. The veteran programs grew stronger, and people remembered to look at each other with more kindness. As summer temperatures continued to soar, no one in Los Angeles needed to beg for water anymore. What had started with one man's request and another's cruelty had transformed into a movement of compassion. And somewhere in the city, Nate continued serving meals at the Veteran Center. Each glass of water he poured a small act of redemption. Each smile he received a step toward forgiveness. And each day a new opportunity to show that change is always possible.